Hey everyone, Sam here with the behind the scenes to my newest animation, Worlds Apart. So this animation has been in the works for quite a few months now. I started brainstorming ideas with Arby and Dan about 5 or so months ago, I think. After I finished the new house animation in December, I played a lot of Half-Life and Half-Life 2, and those two were big inspirations for this story. The Drogue, who are the alien species in this animation, were inspired by the Combine from Half-Life. I've been wanting to do a sci-fi animation for some time now, and explore things like parallel universes, alternate realities, or time travel, or anything kind of science-y has always been interesting story-wise. I wanted to do things with different species and different characters. Things like Mass Effect have always been a big inspiration for the kind of route I want to go down in terms of what stories I want to do. Since we designed the new BPS office, we kind of had a discussion about wanting to keep things within the same universe as things feel a bit consistent. So things like the Dark Hero has Skyfall start at the office and go off and do his own thing. In Worlds Apart, I start at the office and then the derp comes and gets me and we head off, we go through the portal and yeah, I don't want to spoil the animation, but sci-fi always has really interesting visuals and visual effects, so I tried to get that across with the weapons and the technology and even the lighting from time to time. In terms of characters, we have Krista, who is the female protagonist that my character meets when he goes through the portal. Krista was designed by Yu, not you, their name is Yu. He put together a design for her and did 3 different hair colours, and we ended up going with the blue because it looked quite nice with the rest of her clothing. I wanted her to have 2 weapons so she could use different weapons in different situations. I did want to avoid sword fights as much as possible, even though the ending did have a sword fight, because I would much prefer to do projectiles, blasters, guns, that kind of thing. Originally the blasters were meant to have the light up whenever they fired. That just ended up being too much keyframing, so instead the light represents how much ammo or how much energy is in something. Varric was the antagonist of the animation. He was the one with the orange eyes and the big cannon. He was meant to be someone who was higher up in the Drogue kind of hierarchy. His cannon was based off the gravity gun from Half-Life 2, and his skin I think I got from a Fantasy Skins Minecraft website and then modified it and added a few different elements from other skins to make it this more robotic skin. Both Krista and Varric did have kind of fiery, flamey energy swords. Originally, I was going to be using actual fire simulation in Blender. It wasn't until the last kind of week or 2 weeks before release that we decided to just change the design completely. When we were rendering the fire, it was taking so long because fire has something called adaptive domain, which was intersecting with the characters and causing these weird black lines to appear on their skin, as well as having blurring issues when the sword was moving. So I turned the adaptive domain off, but then the render times were insane. They were looking at about 12 minutes a frame as opposed to a minute and a half that we are used to doing. So the week before release, I just said, okay, no. Let's not do the fire anymore, we need to come up with a different design. So Arby offered to design something with materials, and he put together a fairly simple kind of energy on the blade, plus this material energy that's just outside of the blade, which creates the illusion of fire, but it's just a noise texture being animated with some transparency. When looking for maps, I spent so long trying to find maps that had nice, huge landscapes and big villages, medieval villages, and I came across this cool castle village type one by Ragnar LaRouge. I also used one called Unspoken Paths by Ganon Dragmir for when I come across the portal in our reality. Some of these maps definitely were the largest I've ever used. Some of them were just, as soon as you turn the layer on, Blender would just stop working. But I needed to make sure that it actually felt like a real place, like it was just this huge wasteland of nothingness. Now the maps don't actually look that green when put into the animation. I took all the textures of green, I deleted all the trees, I got rid of all the grass, all the flowers, all the plants, and just replaced it with dirt and gravel and stone to make it seem like the world has just completely died out and there's just no life anywhere anymore. But as you saw in the memory scene where she was remembering being a child, it used to be quite nice. Designing the Drogue Fortress was such a colossal investment. I found a bunch of references. I found Minecraft maps that kind of had the same design, but they were just so complicated and huge and Blender wouldn't run it. And I kept putting off the idea of designing one myself and getting people on and building it, but eventually I just did it. I used the Songs of War world of all things and had a few Songs of War builders. I had Arby, Calums, Guardian, Justin, Clock, Lord of Logs, Lux, Mikkel, Piano Puppy and Tori all help put together this fortress. It took a couple of weekends, but I was really happy with the result. They all did a great job. I replaced all the textures with darker black and grey materials to make it seem more Drogue-like. For the engines, I put Arby's fake volumetric material on there and just made it orange and really fast animated, so it looked like these big pulsing engines pumping out energy to keep the fortress in the air. The Drogue designs were fairly interesting. I always liked the idea of having black and orange. That always seems very menacing. So I tried to keep things very dark and just use the orange to highlight certain areas. The energy was just 2 noise textures animated and added on top of each other. The Drogue ships that fly around with the turrets on took a kind of a while because I didn't really know what I wanted. I downloaded a bunch of sci-fi spaceships and modified them a bit, but I wasn't really getting anywhere. So I just kind of put something together fairly quickly, but I think they turned out okay. There was a bunch of miscellaneous stuff as well, like little antennas and radio transmission towers and mining wells and drills to take the energy out of the ground for them to fuel their machines. I wish I put a bit more of that in the animation. There wasn't much downtime to show what they were really doing in the world. The portal was made up of particles and noise textures. I had a particle system that was using a vortex and a harmonic field to keep it spinning and also into a ring. I would control the values of them to have it shrink or grow as necessary. The noise texture behind it faded between the noise and black, so it had a bit of depth to it. It looked like it was actually a hole that you could go through. The blaster projectiles were just simply tiny spheres that had really emissive materials. Originally they were just going to be the same energy material, but it was creating weird colors and textures. So I ended up just creating a solid color, cranking the emission value up, and it created nice vector blur lines as they were moving across the screen. Varric's cannon projectile was a bunch of shapes with different materials on them that kind of represented fiery noise textures almost. It was made up of about 4 different shapes, some for the tail and the hotter, smaller ones for the head. The explosions were made up of the smoke elements that we made for the TNT explosions, but I also created a simple particle simulation that had the energy go outwards and then it kind of sucked back in at the last second, almost like it was about to implode as well. The minigun laser things on the side of the Drogue ships were done just with a particle system, and then I had an object of it kind of looked like a pill, and it was emissive, and that was used as the projectile to fire out in quick succession, making the vector blur do the rest of the work to create the nice lines on either side of them. If you notice, Varric has a shield. When Krista tries to shoot him with her blaster, it hits a force field in front of his armor. That was made by using a very squashed sphere and then adding a noise texture and having the noise move outwards and then fade away after the bullet is hit. Then the one for when she gets the sword onto his arm and it goes through the shield, I cranked those values up to really make it go faster and faster and faster, and then as his arm gets cut off, that's when it fades away. So blasters can't penetrate his shield, but the sword clearly can. I knew the Drogue had to be unique and sound unique, so I had Dan, After Infinity, put together a bunch of sound design for this. He ended up actually doing pretty much all of the sound design for this animation. I wanted them to sound very industrial and dark and gritty. The swords sounded very fire-like. The punches always felt very impactful. This was the first animation that I went shot by shot, I think. I really wanted the wallpaper shots, like when the fortress was coming through the clouds. That shot was great because I used render layers. I put the fortress on a different render layer and then altered the transparency of it so it almost looked like it was coming through the clouds, but it was actually just fading into the sky HDRI, but it ended up creating this really cool effect. There weren't too many thumbnail ideas for this one. It was kind of last minute because I had to save time to get the sponsorship done. The thumbnail we ended up with I was really happy with. It had the same kind of composition as Survival Island. It had a nice big fortress in the background. Oh, what's that? And it had the two characters standing there armed and ready. I've always tried to avoid fights, but I ended up being fairly satisfied with what I came up with. Whenever there was an action set piece, I would go into Paint, of course, and design a bunch of, oh, okay, this character goes here, and then they kill that person, then this character goes over here, and whatnot. So for every fight, it had a little sketch for what was to happen. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this animation turned out. I always wanted to do sci-fi, and I'm finally glad I get to do it. The animation took longer than expected, but I hope it was worth the time and effort I put into it. This is a story I care about, and I do have a lot of plans for where the story goes if people want to see more. I definitely couldn't have done this animation without Dan's help with the sound and Arby's help with the bloopers. He did all the bloopers, and he designed Krista and Varek's swords, so I'm really grateful for everyone's contribution to this. I hope people enjoy this, because I'm really excited to continue the story. There's a lot of interesting things yet to happen. And that's about it. Thank you all for watching, and thank you for supporting us. I'll see you in the next video.